Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, for a special episode recorded at the Arizona Rural Schools Association Conference, here's your host, Ty White.
All right, first question to help relax the atmosphere, to show you there's no tricks here. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what brings you to the ARSA conference?
My name's Glen Lineberry. I'm very happy to be here at the conference for the fifth or sixth year in a row. I am the executive director of a program called the Arizona Student Opportunity Collaborative.
Okay. What are you most eager about this year? What are you looking forward to?
What I love about there are two things I really love about the conference. The first is that at the rural conference, everybody is just here to help and share. There's none of the let me hide my secrets behind my arm on the desk type of thing. It's all open-handed. To be fair, CTE conferences are exactly the same way. And I love that. The second thing is because of that, largely, I always come away having learned some stuff, some things that I can use in my own practice. I usually learn some ways our program can help some more kids. And I usually learn some things that aren't particularly useful at all, but are just fun to have learned.
Okay. Why don't you tell our listeners how Arizona SOC can help our rural communities or rural schools?
Right. So in a nutshell, what we do is we pay highly qualified teachers who are already serving in rural schools to teach an additional course, much like a principal might go down the hallway and arm twist a teacher into teaching during their prep period. Then we make that course available online to rural kids and schools across the state at no charge. So what essentially we're doing is we're providing for schools and students to get the courses that they may not be able to staff in the current teacher shortage.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own rural experience?
I grew up mostly in the Ozarks. My grandparents had a horse and cattle farm. My grandmother was the county English teacher. And so I grew up being encouraged about school, being encouraged to learn, having every adult I interacted with tell me how important school was. But at the same time, then when I went off to university, I found out that there was an awful lot I didn't know. And some of it was academic, but some of it was just that the kids from St. Louis or Kansas City or Chicago had gone to really big libraries and professional sporting events and concerts and restaurants with cloth napkins. And so what we try to do with the collaborative is to fill those instructional gaps, fill those teacher gaps, and with our onboard counselors, fill a lot of the student self-advocacy and self-development gaps.
So it sounds like it'd be an interesting way. Rural schools struggle with one-offs and having those classes that are really unique to what a teacher offers. This would be a way for schools to incorporate that without having to hire 15 new one-off teachers.
Well, and that's right, Ty. And that's what we set out to do, were to fill gaps for things like physics and calculus and Shakespeare. And that's exactly what can happen. If you've got a kid, or suddenly you've got a kid who wants to go to engineering, and your math teacher is pretty good at teaching geometry one year and algebra 2 the next, but that's not going to work prepping that kid for pre-calc and calculus. So you get them into our classes and we can help. The other place we can help is that a lot of schools, they'll lose a teacher or can't fill a job. And maybe you've got a room full of 24 freshmen who need Algebra 1. You can put an aide or a librarian or a counselor in the room to manage the kids, and we can provide the curriculum and the instructor.
Very good. What does the rural advantage mean to you?
When everything's said and done, I think the key to rural is that rural people have always had to figure out how to make do with limited resources. And that has almost always been through cooperation and collaboration. Think about the barn raising scene in the movie Witness. Anybody who's dug a ditch or built a fence or raised a barn or stocked a library knows that it's not something you do on your own. You do it collectively.
One of my favorite parts of this conference is that ARSA recognizes 10 outstanding rural teachers. And ultimately, they pick one to be the teacher of the year that represents Arizona. Do you have any teachers that really impacted you you'd like to share about or shout out?
Well, first of all, my grandmother, who, despite our groans and gnashing of teeth, made us do workbooks in the summers so that we didn't have, my brother and I and my cousins, we didn't have summer learning loss. We started the next school year ready, which was a huge help. I had a history teacher in high school named Tim Roberts who told the most engaging stories in the most powerfully memorable ways. So that actually, as a history teacher, I was almost able to replicate his lessons from memory because they stuck. And he's the one who moved me from reading easy history to reading harder history. And then I had a math teacher. I had a perfectly nice guy who was an assistant football coach for Algebra 1 and a perfectly nice guy who was an assistant basketball coach for geometry. And then Dr. Dorsey Templeton, who'd retired from a college, came to teach back at our high school. And this was the advanced class. We all flunked the first test in Algebra 2, and none of us had ever seen an F before, right? And he came in and he said, "You people know nothing." And he retaught us Algebra 1 and geometry in the fall semester and taught us in Algebra 2 in the second semester. And we all came out of there ready for trig and calc, and
it was pretty phenomenal.
It was a lifesaver. I majored in economics. I never could have gotten through it without Dr. Templeton's math training.
What would you share for someone that's sort of sitting on the fence, right? They haven't come to the ARSA conference before, but they need to be here.
Right. So what's really interesting to me is that everybody here is dealing with the same issues. We all face the teacher shortage. We all have limited financial resources. We all have challenging parental and community relations to deal with. But you'll run into people who are at a slightly different spot in that process. And some of them are ahead of you and they can tell you what they did. Some of them are behind you and you'll actually find yourself surprised that you might be helping somebody. Some people are at the same point you are in whatever journey you're trying to figure out. But they've got a different perspective. And ultimately, it's not about having the correct answer. It's just about getting yourself energized and focused on the idea that if you can keep at it, most problems will end up getting solved.
Thank you very much for your time.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to The Rural Scoop. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. And be sure to follow on Twitter at Dr. Sadorf. That's Dr_SADORF, so that you never miss a new release. You can also check out previous episodes of The Scoop wherever you get your podcasts. Production support for The Rural Scoop is provided by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education.